Spanish colonial rule in the Americas was a brutal regime that killed millions of Native Americans and transferred an almost unimaginable amount of wealth from the New World to the Old. And that wealth would not just transform the Americas, it would end up transforming the world, its entire economies. It wasn't just a connection between the Old World and the New, it drove connections between East and West, North and South. It remade the world. And perhaps no single spot is more representative of the nature of all these changes than the high mountain town of Potosi. Barely remembered today, Potosi and its mountain, called Cerro Rico, literally rich mountain, were surprisingly central to the history of the world. It is history that deserves to be remembered. In 1544 or 1545, a Quechua man known as Diego de Hualpa is credited with accidentally discovering silver at Cerro Rico. He appears to have been searching the mountain for a Quechua shrine and may have been working for a Spanish captain at a nearby mine at a much lower elevation that primarily produced tin, zinc, and lead. As night fell, Diego is said to have started a fire to camp for the night, and by morning he saw veins of silver that had melted from stone in the flames. Other legends around the discovery also exist, and while many locals already knew of the silver at Cerro Rico, Hualpa does seem to have played a role in its discovery. He's mentioned in several Spanish sources, including a sworn statement he made to a Spanish priest. One native chief wrote, "Tell them that the bad man, Hualpa, needs to be punished because he has discovered Potosi." Fortunately for the Spanish, and very unfortunately for the local population, Hualpa had stumbled upon the richest silver deposits in the world. By April of 1545, the first mine in Potosi opened, and the first buildings of what would become one of the most important mining centers in history had begun. Initially, the mining was largely done using Inca clay and stone flower pot furnaces. They relied on wind coming down the slopes of the mountain to fuel the charcoal fires, and some 15,000 of them dotted the mountain to melt silver from the extracted ore. The sheer volume of silver coming from the mines led to the saying that Cerro Rico was made of silver. Potosi sits at nearly 13,500 feet above sea level, making it one of the highest cities in the world. One Spaniard wrote that Potosi is situated in cold, snow-covered, sterile, fruitless, and almost uninhabitable highlands. In 1547, the city held 14,000 people. 50 years later, it increased tenfold to 150,000, becoming larger than many European cities. The first veins were rich in pure silver, which was easy to extract. Even before the discovery of Potosi, the discoveries by the Spanish had upended global markets. Millions of pesos worth of treasures came from the fabulously wealthy Incan Empire, and it drove global markets as demand for silver in China kept silver from the Andes flowing. The Ming Dynasty had shifted from paper money to coins, and silver was one of the only goods China actually wanted from the West. In his Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith expressed a particular interest in the reach of the silver trade, because a single item of commerce tied markets together globally. But the silver found at Potosi was game-changing. In the second half of the 16th century, Cerro Rico mines produced 90% of the silver that would come from the Viceroyalty of Peru, and as much as 60% of the total silver mined in the world between 1550 and 1600. A saying appeared, "Worth a Potosi," meaning to be worth a great value. Silver was carried by mule and llama to points of Buenos Aires and Panama City, and from there made its way to Spain, across the Caribbean, or to Manila in the Philippines, and from there to China. In 1559, the Habsburg Emperor Charles V bestowed the title Imperial Villa upon the town and called it the treasury of the world. 2 years later, Spanish King Philippe II gifted the town an ornate shield with the engraving, "For the powerful emperor, for the wise king, this mountain of silver could conquer the world." The money financed a kind of military-industrial complex that allowed the Habsburg Empire to engage in a dizzying number of conflicts to expand its influence. By 1565, the most convenient and rich veins had been fully exploited, and silver production dwindled. In 1569, Francisco de Toledo was made Viceroy of Peru. Toledo would make for a terribly effective and destructive administrator. He immediately began an ambitious program to centralize colonial government and bring in greater mining revenue. He also instituted the Toledo Reforms, which defined the Mita program, which forced the native populations to labor for the crown. Any viceroy of Peru would have had to focus much of his time on the mines in Potosi. Between 1568 and 1570, the first coins minted in Spanish America appeared, and Toledo ordered a mint built in Potosi. The building was so expensive that the Spanish king remarked that the whole building must be made of pure silver. Toledo ordered the roads paved, the first church built, and hundreds of mills to grind silver ore, powered by 32 dams. He also introduced a new way of extracting the silver, which would guarantee the city's ascendancy for decades to come. In 1554, Bartolomé de Medina is credited with developing the patio method for extracting silver, which uses mercury amalgamation to recover silver from mixed ore. Silver in the Americas was often found as a compound, which required mercury amalgamation for refinement. Ore is ground into a fine sand and mixed with several ingredients, spread on a shallow-walled patio, and then left in the sun. A chemical reaction extracts the silver into a mercury amalgamation, and the mercury is then heated and vaporized, leaving only the silver. At Potosi, a refined process decreased the 6 to 8 week wait time to 10 to 20 hours, using the pan method, a heated copper vessel that was much more effective in the cold Andes. Toledo's work ensured that Potosi would continue making money for the Spanish crown, though at a great cost to the local population. Every year, 13,000 Andean men from an area of 200,000 square miles were forced to labor at the Potosi mines, about 1 out of every 7 adult males in the region. The mines could go 500 meters deep, and they were carelessly built and often airless, and native workers carried hundreds of pounds of ore up rickety ladders from the furnace heat of the deep mines to the frigid air of the Andes. A nearby mercury mine was also found to supply the amalgamation. Work in the mercury mines was so dangerous and crippling that it was colloquially called the death mita. Workers often died of mercury poison, pneumonia, and accidents such as falls and mine collapses. One mine boss wrote, "If 20 healthy workers enter on Monday, half may emerge crippled on Saturday." By the late 1600s, Upper Peru, today mostly modern Bolivia, had lost half of its indigenous population, thanks to death under the Spanish and locals fleeing their fate. Those that survived often remained in Potosi beyond their initial stay, because traveling from their homes to Potosi cost more than they earned working there. If they stayed in Potosi, they had a chance to make money as paid workers and were exempt from future drafts into the Mita. The depopulation only exacerbated the problem, and by 1600, nearly half of the eligible male population worked in the mines in any given year. Another observer wrote that of 7,000 Andeans forced to go into the mines, only some 2,000 return, and of the other 5,000, some die and others stay. The mercury also caused widespread damage to the environment, polluting streams and destroying local ecology. The mines had their booms and busts, but by far the greatest disaster to ever befall Potosi occurred in the middle of the 17th century. The mint at Potosi was worked mostly by African slaves who processed a huge amount of silver, an average of 300,000 pounds per year through the 1640s. The Spanish attempted to move as much of this precious metal as they could to Europe, and to do this they produced cobs, irregular silver coins defined by weight. The term cob is usually thought to come from the term cabo, meaning end, because the chunks of metal would be cut off metal bars and weighed before being stamped by a hammer. If the coins were too heavy, pieces could simply be clipped off. Many of these coins were the famous pieces of 8, valued at 8 Spanish reales and meant to be 93% silver. This made the silver easy to transport, and it could be used as money at any stage of the journey. It powered trade routes through the Americas and stimulated the economy of port cities before being packed onto ships that headed for Europe. Spanish reales and cobs were accepted globally, traded in markets in Europe, the colonies, Asia, and even extensively in Africa. Cobs had also come to be known as pirate cobs because pirates often captured them on their way to Europe, and cobs make up a large number of the coins pulled out of shipwrecks. Though practical, cobs introduced a host of issues. Because the coins were irregularly shaped, they were rarely the weight that they were meant to be and could be clipped without appearing to be tampered with. As the coins made their way around the world, people clipped off their own pieces of silver and passed the coin off at face value, further debasing the coin. But the scandal that broke went much deeper. Even before the scandal broke, rumors about the coins were circulating. In the 1640s, ports in India began rejecting the coins altogether. European ports would do so as well. Mughal India sold them as scrap to bullion dealers. In Potosi, the mint blamed the slaves, claiming that they were adding tin and other metals and stealing the silver. In 1648, Aragon of Castile complained that the coins were worth as little as 5 reales instead of 8. Spanish royal investigations proved that Potosi coins contained an average of only 75% of the silver they were meant to have. King Philippe sent a former inquisitor to Potosi to investigate. In Potosi, the job of assayer, who verified the coin's purity, was regularly auctioned off, and the assayers did their best to enrich themselves. While they blamed, tortured, and even executed slaves, the slaves reported to the inquisitor that they were ordered to debase the coins in the middle of the night, while the assayers and others made a fortune off the debased coinage. The corruption permeated the entire silver operation. Francisco Gomez de la Rocha, a former government official, and his partner Juan Ramirez, the assayer, were executed for the fraud, and most other officials were fined or removed from their positions. A new assayer, Juan Rodriguez de Rodas, was put in charge, but while his coins, called rodazes to differentiate them from the debased coins, were better, they were still short of the required silver content. Desperate to deal with the scandal, the Spanish crown devalued all of the 8 reale coins to 6 reales. At Potosi, the solution was slightly different, with the new coins devalued to 7.5, while the old ones were devalued to 6. Unfortunately, the poor coin strikes meant that many fraudsters were able to remake the old 6 reale coins up to 7.5, which ruined the value of all the coins minted at Potosi. From that point, the coins were required to have an Assier mark as well as a mint mark. That didn't end the consequences of the scandal. The 17th century has been called a period of crisis, and the debasement of the world's first global coin played a part in that disastrous period. Wars were financed across Europe by the Habsburgs, financed almost entirely by American silver. Instability was global. The Ming Dynasty fell in China in 1644, partially due to a sudden lack of silver. European states were engaged in nearly constant war. The Potosi scandal rocked the financial world, causing a panic that spread through money houses in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Trade ground to a halt in some areas, with Spanish currency discredited. New coins were finally minted in 1652, but the reputation of Peruvian coins never recovered. The mines still run at Potosi, although decreasing silver prices mean that some of the emphasis is shifted to tin and other metals. The mountain is still believed to contain an enormous amount of silver. And it's still very dangerous to mine at Potosi. The average lifespan of a Potosi miner is just 40 years, and Cerro Rico is called the mountain who eats men. That mountain is so honeycombed by mines that the summit is physically sinking. There's several places in the world that are named after Potosi, perhaps in hopes of replicating its legendary wealth, like San Luis Potosi, Mexico, and Potosi, Wisconsin, Potosi, Michigan, and the ghost town of Potosi, Nevada. It's really difficult to overstate the impact that these mines had on human history. They created the first global currency, which created the first truly global trade, which drove a new demand for people as bankers and moneylenders and traders. It was part of the globalization that we historians use to literally define the transition from the Middle Ages to the early modern period. The draw of that silver drove European colonization of the Americas, which hastened the decline of New World empires like the Incas and the Aztecs, and led to the subjugation and genocide of native populations, as well as growing the Atlantic slave trade. The Pieces of Eight funded the European wars of religion and the golden age of piracy. The globalization of trade brought Christianity around the world. And then, having transformed history already, the decline of the currency and the disaster of the 1649 scandals changed history again by hastening the decline of the Spanish Empire, and in that vacuum rose new empires like the British Empire. Simply put, much of the modern world, as we know it today, was defined by the silver from the mines at Potosi. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the History Guide, short snippets of forgotten history. And if you did enjoy, feed the algorithm by making a comment or clicking that like button. If you have suggestions for future episodes, please send those to our suggestions email box. Check out our webpage at thehistoryguide.net. And of course, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can book a special message from the History Guy on Cameo and check out our merchandise at teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes of Forgotten History, all you need to do is subscribe.